Imagine this. You are 13 years old. You're sitting in your bedroom, doodling away on a sheet of paper, and suddenly your father walks in. He comes straight towards you, looks you in the eye, and says, "Who are you?" You're like, what? What kind of question is that? Well, that happened to me, and I was that kid. At that moment, all I wanted to do was outsmart him. So as a teenager, what do? I start listing everything I know. I said, "Dad, I'm Ruchi, your daughter. I'm a girl, I'm 13, I'm in 8th grade, I love dogs, I like playing badminton," and so on. To which he replies, "Ruchi, everything you've said to me is true. They are facts. But is that really who you are?" That messed with my brain. It took me down this rabbit hole where I have been ever since, searching for the answers. I spent 10 years studying psychology. That helped a bit. And another decade working within universities, researching and teaching what it means to relate to others. How do we negotiate an understanding in relationships? As humans, the one thing that fascinates us all, well, are other humans. We have this need to understand them, to be able to tell stories about who they are, and a need to be understood. You and I have felt the pleasure of understanding and the pain of misunderstanding in relationship with our parents, our friends, our partners, our children, even our colleagues at work. More so now, when we live in a polarized society, misunderstandings creep in rather quickly when you're discussing politics, religion, identity, inequality, environment, and all the other social issues. In fact, we live in a world where misunderstanding is the misery we inflict on others. Humans are hard to read. They are even harder to understand. You have this unique access to your own mind. You know, for the most part, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and what drives you. Some of who you are is observable, but most of who you are is invisible. And yet, we are baffled in conversations, in discussions, in negotiations, when others don't see us or the world as we see it. Understanding and misunderstanding are topics close to my heart. 15 years ago, when I was doing my PhD, I looked at how taking perspective and empathizing affects how we react to betrayal, whether we choose to forgive and trust again, or we take revenge. For the last 11 years, I've studied how we deal with conflicts and disagreements at work, whether we reflect on them, how do we listen to others' perspectives, ideas, how do we deliberate and use them in our own decisions. From that body of work, one thing, an important thing that I've learned is we are very good at spotting misunderstanding, while we suck at creating understanding. So at this point, we should be asking ourselves, what does it mean to understand? Where and when does it happen? And let's start by dissecting the very word understand. The word under in understand is actually derived from an old Persian, possibly Sanskrit root called antar. Antar means among and between things. And the word stand in understand is actually derived from a German-Dutch root, which means to be present and to exist. So to understand is to be present and exist among and between things, not over, not under, but among. So the next question in your mind should be, where am I supposed to exist? Like, what is that space? Well, if you ask the philosophers and the psychologists, they'd argue that you have to somehow exist in the mind of the other, that understanding is walking in a person's shoes mentally and simulating what they're feeling and what they're thinking. I want to challenge that view. I want to show you that it's problematic to look at understanding as an individual's responsibility to replicate another person's inner world. I want to suggest to you that understanding is not what a person does. Understanding is not a thing. It's not a noun. It's not an outcome or an endpoint that we have to somehow permanently achieve. Rather, understanding is a verb. It's a process where two parties come into a shared space, where they co-create a frame, where they define and interpret the meaning and significance of each other's realities and truths. Let's take a detour for a moment, and let's look at the language we use to talk about misunderstanding. We often say things like, they distorted what I said, or they misconstrued what I was saying. Common in these expressions is the idea that somehow the other did not replicate and mirror my inner world and my inner thoughts. Now, it's problematic to look at it because by that logic, to understand, you'd have to be what? Michelangelo? And, someone who can carve from a block of stone a form that is so perfect that it unquestionably represents its subject's truth. Now, you and I know we can't all be as skilled as Michelangelo. So I want to suggest to you that if we need to reimagine how we look at understanding, that we need to see it as a collaborative process of molding with clay. If you see understanding as this collaborative process happening in a shared space, where you're molding with clay, you realize that both parties have to work on it together. That your actions to add layers and subtract layers of knowledge and clay are not in isolation, that they're going to impact the moves of the other. That both of you have to dynamically adapt to what's happening on the other side. That you have to creatively coordinate to form a shape. And talking is essential. Talking about what's happened in the past, what's happening right now, and what may be future goals that are worth pursuing. When you see understanding as a collaborative process of molding, you also realize that you have to entertain multiple possibilities, and that sometimes those possibilities are contradictory, that you have to remain present among those possibilities even when the clay collapses, that you have to rebuild, and that it is futile to try and achieve a permanent or a perfect state of understanding. That like molding, all understanding is fundamentally partial and incomplete, with scope for further improvement. I've been teaching negotiation skills for over a decade. I have observed and analyzed thousands of discussions and negotiations, and I've seen people fail and some succeed in this collaborative process of molding. So what aren't we doing well, and what can you do to get better at it? What I've found is that those who fail at the process of understanding are the ones who see understanding as knowing. They look at it as an act of uncovering facts. They tend to present themselves in terms of those facts and positions, a little bit like the 13-year-old me did to my dad's question, and they tend to seek similar facts and positions from others. Knowing is like hearing. Understanding is the process of listening. It's about seeing the connection between ideas, and far more importantly, the meaning and significance of those positions, ideas, perspectives for the other, for yourself, and in that relationship, why they matter. The other reason why I have found why people fail at understanding is because they absolutely love to conclude. And they do so based on unidentified and unquestioned assumptions. Assumptions are our beliefs about how the world works, how things are connected, what actions lead to outcomes, and what goals are worth pursuing. In fact, assumptions are the springboard from where logic and reason flow. So now, you know a fair bit about why we fail. So what can we do to get better at this process? Well, the first thing we can do is we can start to identify and articulate our assumptions early in conversations and invite the other to do the same. When you allow assumptions to exist in that shared space, you are allowing for multiple interpretations of reality, where you can experiment and look if assumptions don't match or are they overlapping. The other thing you can do in that process is start caring about the semantics. Words don't mean the same thing for everyone. They don't have objective truths. We need to clarify the meaning behind our spoken word, which means we need to define things early in conversations. We need to provide examples, use more synonyms in the way we speak, so that the context gets more clarified. We need to search for the non-apparent meaning behind the other people's spoken words. You can do that by checking and rechecking the essence of what you've heard till multiple ways of interpreting and saying that idea is acceptable to the other. To get better at identifying assumptions and clarifying meaning, we need to start getting curious. We need to learn how to probe and ask better questions, especially the what-if questions. The what-if questions are when you present hypothetical scenarios during discussions where, for example, you could say, if X, then what? Listen to the reaction of the other. Follow it up with why and why not. So you've been here for about 10 minutes. Were you hearing or were you understanding? Do you now feel that you're more aware of what the process of understanding entails? Are you going to take this into your lives the next time you interact with someone? The next time you sit down with your child, your parent, partner, friend, colleague at work, where you want to create understanding, you want to co-create that shared frame. Are you going to remember to remain present, entangled amongst ideas? So take the memory of the words you've heard today. Share it tonight with one other person, someone with whom you can debate the assumptions behind the ideas you've heard today, to clarify the meaning and the logic and reason from where it flows, so you can collaboratively mold your own deep understanding about understanding. Thank you.